Okay, so this is 8.4, focusing on the continued on intelligence. Just a little bit of a review. IQ, what is intelligence? Intelligence quotient. This is just a review from your 8.3. It was based off Binet's idea of mental age. Terman was the one who created the first IQ test called the Stanford-Binet test, and it essentially tested between, or figured out, gave you a number between your mental age over your chronological age. And so your IQ was 100 if you were on target with where you should be age-wise. Today's scoring is a little bit different, and so we use what we call the Wechsler Adult Intelligence Scale, the WAIS. It's more commonly used. It gives IQ and breaks down by category, so it's not just one specific number. And this is an idea of the categories that they test you in now. So there's 11. They take a look at everything from just general information all the way down to how you might put something together. Again, just testing a variety of different areas of intelligence. This is the Flynn effect. The Flynn effect is the fact that IQ scores have been rising over the past 60 years, on average by a total of 27 points, which you can see right here. So there's a lot of questions that go into this. How did that happen? Is it because we just have more information available to us? People are better educated? Environmental factors, people just tend to be a little bit healthier and get more nutrition. So there's a lot of factors that could go into why intelligence has been rising over the past 60 years. But you do need to know the Flynn effect, and you do need to know that in the past 60 years, intelligence scores have increased. So if you're going to give somebody an IQ test, what do you need to make sure it has? Well, there's really three major things that you need to make sure your test has. The first is that it has to be standardized. What exactly does that mean if it's standardized? Well, it has to have meaningful scores. So you compare your scores to other scores, and you want to see the standard deviation. You want to see this normal bell curve where you see 68% of the people falling within one standard deviation of the mean, within 15 points above or below. And you want to see 96 people falling between the 30-point range. So again, as long as you see this consistently with whatever IQ test you give, then your IQ test would be what we considered standardized. Again, I said there's three things that you need in order to have to know if your test is good. The first was standardized. The second is it has to be reliable, meaning that if you give this test to the same person over and over again, you're going to get very similar results every time. And third and final, it has to be valid. And valid is going to break down into a couple different areas. First of all, it has to show us, does the test actually predict and measure what it claims it is going to do? There are two types of validity. The first is content. Does it have relevant content? So in other words, am I giving you a final exam over what I taught you in the course? 2, predictability. Is it predictive? Can it predict future performance? So can it give me a good understanding of how you're going to do on a future assessment? Intelligence testing today, how do we use it? Well, first we use it for aptitude. We're going to predict your ability to learn. So a lot of times they might give an IQ test to determine if you can get into a specific school, more so because they want to see, do you have that ability to learn? Predictive, does it really predict what it claims it's going to predict? And then secondly, achievement. It might reflect what you have learned. So I might want to give an IQ test at the end of the year to determine, did you really learn what I was hoping you would learn throughout the year? And that's where we see content validity come in. And that is does the test actually sample the key information that I've taught you? Go ahead, think of something, an example of each one, if you can, and then think, how does achievement affect aptitude? Do you think there's a correlation between those two? Intelligence over time, this is kind of cool. So after the age of 7, because before age of 7, your intelligence is a little unreliable. But what we found is after the age of 7, your intelligence stays pretty consistent. Yeah, of course you're going to learn new things and you're going to get smarter, but that also increases with your age. So you kind of have an upward trend overall of intelligence. We don't see a huge drastic variation typically for most people after about age 7. Now, there are extremes of intelligence, right? We have people who are considered what we call mentally retarded and intellectually disabled, and they're the ones that have the IQ below 70. So in this final little wing over here of the standard deviation. But then we also have people who are extremely highly intelligent, and they score in the top 2% or an IQ above 135. Mensa is the organization that recognizes the top 2% of individuals or intellects. And we're going to focus a little bit on mental retardation. So what we know about mental retardation is that it is a specific condition, meaning there is a limited mental ability. So it's not anything that they don't want to learn or there's something else going on. It's just that there's literally a mental inability in their brain functioning. And we know this because they typically score below a 70 on intelligence tests, or they need to score below a 70 on intelligence tests. And what happens is it produces difficulty in adapting to the demands of life because they just don't have that ability to do that. Their brain just isn't fluid enough to make those adaptations. And it can vary, mental retardation. It can be something very mild where they can adapt a little bit, or it can function for the most part, to very profound where it's extremely difficult. What causes mental retardation? Well, there's 2 that we are looking at mostly. The first is PKU. PKU is where the liver fails to produce an enzyme necessary for early brain development while you're pregnant. So you're pregnant and for whatever reason your liver isn't producing what it needs for the baby to fully develop. And the second is Down syndrome, and this is a genetic disorder. Essentially, they're missing or have an extra copy of the 21st chromosome, so they have 47 chromosomes instead of just 46 chromosomes. Now, these are 2 reasons. This doesn't help us with the majority of mental retardation cases. 90% of all diagnosed cases are hard to determine exactly what causes it. Genetic influences on intelligence. Well, you guys kind of looked at this yesterday in your assignment for 8.3, but essentially what we find is that we see the most similarities between identical twins who are raised together when it comes to intelligence, which makes us think that there is something to be said about genetics and environment together. Differences. There is differences in IQ when it comes to race, and we'll get into why that is in a minute. Whites are roughly around 100. African Americans average around 85 for IQ scores, and Hispanics average between 92 to 93. We are seeing those differences diminish slightly over time. And one major factor that we see with IQ scores, because when we take a look at each of these groups individually and break them down, is environmental. People that are raised in areas that have more economic advantages tend to score better than individuals that are raised in less economic or poor areas. Again, just due to resources and environmental factors. And when you break down the economic differences between these races, you'll also see very similar breakdowns. And gender differences. This is kind of interesting, more so than necessary. There are differences in the genders, but they're very small. We see girls do better in spelling, verbal, nonverbal memory, sensation. They tend to be more sensitive. They can do a better job at detecting emotions. And boys tend to score a little bit higher on spatial ability. So they can kind of figure out how to put things together. We do know that boys outnumber girls in special education. They tend to talk a little bit later and stutter more often than girls, but they tend to catch up after puberty. And there used to be a significant difference between girls and boys at math, and now we see girls are just as good as boys at math. One of the problems with these group differences is the stereotype threat, and this is the idea that there can be a bias based on negative stereotypes when we look at this information.